the mid-2000s. Wall Street is buzzing. The housing market is on fire and everyone is chasing the next big return. Hedge funds promise steady double-digit gains year after year, no matter what the market throws at them. Investors line up, thinking they've found the golden ticket. It's now 2008. Wall Street is thrust into chaos. The housing market has collapsed, banks are failing, and fear is everywhere. But while the world watches the entire financial system crumble on television, in an office at 885 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, known as the Lipstick Building, something even darker is unraveling. Welcome to Follow the Lies, Fraud and Deceit Uncovered. I'm Kevin Barrows, former FBI Special Agent and lead case agent on major fraud investigations, now at Renaissance Associates, and co-host of Smithsonian Channel's Sports Detectives. Today we go inside the pinnacle of deception, the Bernard Madoff Ponzi scheme, the largest in history. Billions in investor money gone, charities wiped out, and generational wealth extinguished in the blink of an eye. How one man's elaborate lies exposed huge cracks in the financial system. Now that you've got the big picture, let me give you a quick sense of why this case intrigues me. Since my days as an FBI Special Agent, where I served as the lead case agent on two of the largest white-collar investigations in U.S. history, I've continued this work at Renaissance Associates, where I oversee complex fraud matters, including major Ponzi schemes. In 2009, my firm was retained by the court-appointed trustee in the Madoff liquidation to help trace assets, support recovery efforts, and work alongside counsel to return money to victims. I saw the human cost up close. Lives ruined, retirement accounts gone, and families broken. In Follow the Lies, we take you inside these major fraud cases, showing exactly how the lies are constructed, how they're dismantled, and giving you practical lie detector tips you can actually use in your own life. In this episode, we dive into the Madoff case, how one man built an estimated $65 billion house of lies, the devastating fallout, and why this kind of deception still haunts investors today. If these kinds of stories interest you, real fraud cases, insider perspective, and practical lie detector tips, hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. And please tap the bell on YouTube to make sure you know when the next episode drops. Now let's step back and see how this epic fraud began to build. Bernard Madoff was a Wall Street legend. He founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities in 1960, and by the 2000s it had become a powerhouse. Madoff pioneered electronic trading, served as chairman of NASDAQ, and built a reputation as one of the most brilliant minds on the street. To the outside world, he was the man who could seemingly beat the market with machine-like consistency. His hedge fund promised something almost irresistible: steady annual returns of 10 to 12%, year after year. No matter how well the broader market performed, in good times and bad, the numbers never seemed to waver. Investors didn't just want in, they begged to get in. But the fund was invitation only, highly exclusive, and turning people away only made it more desirable. What Madoff was hiding from investors and regulators was staggering in both its simplicity and its scale. There were no real trades, no real profits, and no real investment strategy. It was a giant illusion, propped up by a sterling reputation and an elaborate web of completely fabricated account statements. For those who hear the term Ponzi scheme thrown around a lot, here's the quick backstory. It's named after Charles Ponzi, an Italian immigrant who ran a notorious scam in Boston in 1920. Ponzi promised investors a 50% profit in just 45 days by exploiting differences in international postal reply coupons. It sounded brilliant. The reality? He never actually executed the coupon scheme at any meaningful scale. He simply took money from new investors to pay returns to earlier ones, a classic pyramid. The scheme collapsed when too many people demanded their money back at once. Ponzi defrauded investors of roughly $20 million, about $300 million in today's dollars. His name stuck because the model was so simple and so effective. No real underlying business, no real profits, just shifting money from new investors to old ones, keeping the scam alive until it couldn't be sustained anymore. That's exactly what Madoff did, but on a scale Charles Ponzi could never have imagined. Madoff targeted affluent communities, religious organizations, charities, and even some celebrities. He did this through what was known as feeder funds. Think of a feeder fund like a middleman. It would collect money from hundreds or thousands of individual investors, often wealthy people who didn't have direct access to Madoff, and then pool all that money together before sending it into his main fund. This gave regular investors the feeling that they were getting access to an exclusive, high-performing club, like they had a seat at the table with one of Wall Street's most respected names. In reality, these feeder funds greatly accelerated the scale of the fraud. Some of the biggest names on Wall Street, respected investment firms, sent billions his way with surprisingly little due diligence. Then they sold the dream to their own clients. Bernie's fund is rock solid. On paper, Madoff's operation was brutally simple. Take in new money, fabricate account statements showing consistent gains, and pay out withdrawal requests using deposits from newer investors. But when the 2008 financial crisis hit and redemption requests began pouring in faster than new money could arrive, the house of cards finally collapsed. What made the fraud so convincing wasn't outrageous promises of 50% returns. It was the quiet guarantee of reliability. Steady double-digit gains with almost no losses in a volatile market. Madoff also played the exclusivity card flawlessly. Long waiting lists, selectively turning away investors, and making people feel lucky just to be accepted. The psychology was powerful. Being in with Bernie became a status symbol on Wall Street. People didn't ask too many hard questions because they didn't want to lose their place at the table. People weren't just investing money. They were buying status and reassurance. In many ways, Madoff operated like a more sophisticated version of Jordan Belfort, the Wolf of Wall Street. Belfort also made people feel like they were part of an exclusive inner circle. In both cases, the real product wasn't the investment itself. It was the feeling of being in the know with someone who seemed untouchable. This one lasted decades because trust in Madoff's reputation completely trumped basic skepticism and common sense. Investors eventually lost everything. That was the scheme, but how do you uncover a fraud this big, this long-running, when even regulators missed it? That's when the real detective work began. If you enjoy stories like this, where trust gets exploited on such an enormous scale, hit subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. And if you're on YouTube, tap the bell to never miss an episode. Now let's rewind to the mid-2000s and see how the FBI exposed this massive Ponzi scheme and just how deep it ran. The Madoff scheme started crumbling from the inside. In December 2008, as the financial crisis took hold, Madoff confessed to his sons that his fund was one big lie, a Ponzi scheme with no real assets. They reported him to the FBI the next day. The FBI raided Madoff's offices on December 11, 2008. What they found was almost incomprehensible. Fake trading records, fabricated statements, and a fund that was insolvent by $50 billion. Madoff was arrested the same day on securities fraud charges. I wasn't involved in the arrest. That was handled by the FBI's New York field office. But shortly afterwards, my company was retained by the court-appointed trustee to assist with the liquidation and recovery efforts. Madoff had operated his Ponzi scheme from a separate, secure floor in the Lipstick Building to hide it from staff and regulators. He used the 19th floor for his legitimate market-making business, while the fraud side operated on the heavily restricted 17th floor, staffed by loyal, complicit, or unwitting associates. As part of our work assisting the trustee, I spent time in the Madoff offices reviewing materials connected to the case. What sticks with me most is the first time I walked into his office. On the window ledge behind his desk sat a 4-foot sculpture called Soft Screw, a large, twisted, crooked black screw. It stopped me cold. In that moment, it felt like far more than just art. To me, it was a perfect symbol of what he had done to his friends, colleagues, and thousands of trusting clients, twisting and distorting the lives of people who had trusted him completely. At that moment, the scale of the betrayal stopped being just numbers on a page and became something very real. In the days that followed, Insiders turned cooperating witnesses, and the pieces of the puzzle came together. But the most frustrating realization was that the warning signs had been there for years and repeatedly ignored. A financial analyst and whistleblower named Harry Markopolos had been sounding the alarm since 1999. He sent detailed letters and mathematical analyses to the SEC, explicitly naming Bernard Madoff and explaining why his returns were mathematically impossible for any legitimate investment strategy. He followed up with increasingly urgent warnings in 2000, 2001, 2005, 2007, and even into 2008. Markopolos laid out the case with precision. Madoff's consistent gains with almost no losses defied basic market mathematics. He warned that the operation was almost certainly a Ponzi scheme, yet the SEC repeatedly dismissed or inadequately investigated his complaints. Some of the responses were so casual that Markopolos later said he felt like he was shouting into a void, while the fraud continued to grow, unchecked. At times he even feared for his own safety if Madoff ever discovered he was the source of the complaints. As someone who has run major fraud investigations, I can tell you this is exactly where these cases usually break open, once you have cooperating witnesses and hard evidence showing a clear pattern of deception. But it wasn't until Madoff himself confessed in December 2008 that the warnings were finally taken seriously, far too late for thousands of victims. I can't imagine how frustrating it must have been for Markopolos, shouting into that void for nearly a decade, watching the fraud grow larger every single day, knowing the devastation that was coming, while people who were supposed to stop it stood idly by. Madoff was essentially a one-man auditor, generating impossibly consistent returns with no independent verification. I've seen smaller frauds get caught much faster, yet his reputation and the greed of investors kept the machine running for decades. I recall pouring through feeder fund records as part of our efforts to assist the trustees team. These weren't just numbers. They were pensions, life savings, and charity endowments wiped out. The investigation required teams of investigators extracting and reviewing digital evidence, tracing the money flows and identifying net winners who had profited unknowingly and had to repay billions. As with virtually all frauds, the human toll was the hardest part. Retirees who lost everything, charities forced to close their doors, families whose futures vanished overnight. One woman wrote that she had lost her life savings while battling breast cancer and caring for her sick husband. Another described how his 94-year-old mother was left penniless and his legally blind sister lost most of her savings. Families spoke of losing not only their retirement, but the money they set aside for their grandchildren's college education. That's what investment fraud does. It doesn't just take money. It steals safety, security, hope, and dignity. We worked alongside counsel to trace assets, identify victims, and support the clawback process. It wasn't easy. Many of the net winners had already spent the money, believing it was legitimate. But every dollar recovered mattered. Through a tremendous effort, the trustees team was ultimately able to recover a significant portion of the losses and return money to those who had been hurt the most. The scheme's depth was shocking. Madoff had run it for decades, exploiting trust in his reputation with little oversight. It was a masterclass in deception. No guns, no violence, just lies layered on lies. He and his fund played hard to get, and everybody wanted to be part of it. If a fund or investor asked to perform diligence, he would simply turn them away. The case exposed how even the most sophisticated investors can fall prey to a Ponzi scheme, and how regulators failed to see what was right in front of them. Despite 5 separate inquiries over 16 years, they ignored whistleblowers and never verified Madoff's trading with independent third parties, relying instead on fraudulent documents provided by Madoff himself. The FBI moved fast after his confession to his family. After his arrest on December 11, 2008, Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including securities fraud, money laundering, and perjury. On June 29, 2009, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison, effectively life. He died in 2021 at age 82 while serving his sentence. The schemes revealed triggered the largest investor fraud recovery effort in history. The impact was devastating and led to sweeping reforms, stronger SEC oversight, new whistleblower protections, and greater scrutiny of hedge funds. It was one of the defining frauds of the century, showing how deception can hide in plain sight for decades. Even today, when I speak with financial professionals, many are still stunned that someone as respected as Madoff was able to pull it off. It forced the entire industry to confront a hard truth. Reputation alone is never enough. What still amazes me the most is how long the scheme actually lasted. The red flags were everywhere, especially those impossibly consistent returns with almost no losses. Yet Madoff's reputation and the greed of investors kept it alive for years. People simply didn't want to believe it could be a fraud. That's the story of the Bernard Madoff Ponzi scheme. From a Wall Street institution to a $65 billion house of lies. Now let me leave you with a few final thoughts. Every case has its place on what I call the deception spectrum, and this one sits at the very high end. Systemic, decades-long fraud on a colossal scale that infiltrated Wall Street and destroyed trust globally. Madoff's lies didn't just shake an industry. They exposed cracks in the entire financial system that are still being repaired today. Each episode, I'll share a lie detector tip, a practical, field-tested technique to help you spot deception or protect yourself from it before it's too late. Today's tip is one I wish more investors had followed in the Madoff case. Always do your due diligence. Not long ago, a client came to me concerned about a multi-million-dollar investment in a property financing and development deal. The executive behind it presented himself as a highly regarded expert. My client was hesitant about the cost of a thorough background investigation, but he ultimately agreed to move forward. What we uncovered was eye-opening. The executive had been involved in a joint venture with individuals who had been convicted of federal securities fraud, and he himself had been named as a defendant in 9 separate lawsuits for breach of contract and fraud filed by former business partners. That due diligence saved my client from what could have been a very expensive mistake. In Madoff's fund, those impossibly solid returns year after year with almost no losses were a giant red flag. Real investments fluctuate. Ponzi schemes don't. That's why research and verifying details isn't optional. It's survival. Whether you're eyeing an investment, evaluating a business partner, or even authenticating a signed jersey, the same rules apply. Know the seller, verify the trail, question the too good to be true, and trust your gut when something just doesn't add up. I'll share more on how to spot and follow those trails in future episodes. From an impeccable reputation to a $65 billion sleight of hand, we followed the lives of Bernard Madoff. Thousands of victims, decades of deception, and a wake-up call that reshaped Wall Street overnight. The unsettling part? There have been many big Ponzi schemes uncovered since Madoff, and there are undoubtedly many more to come. We see them in crypto schemes, unregulated high-yield investments, and guaranteed returns that sound almost impossible to believe. The core tricks are the same. It's just the packaging that's changed. Just remember my lie detector tip. When investing, hire a professional to conduct in-depth searches, review audited statements, and seek independent verification. In the Madoff case, the impossibly consistent returns were the main giveaway. Next time, we're diving into another big one. Have you or your family member ever been a victim of fraud? Your story may help others. Send it to Kevin at followtheliespodcast.com. It might even become the next episode. Hit subscribe, drop a rating and review, and help us keep uncovering the lies. If you're on YouTube, tap the bell to never miss a show. And be sure to head to my website, followtheliespodcast.com, to grab your free guide, 7 proven strategies to spot lies and uncover the truth in any interview. One quick note before we go. Follow the Lies is now featured on the World Podcast Network. If you enjoy the show, I'd really appreciate it if you'd follow us there too. Thanks for listening. Until next time, follow the lies.